the Father and the Son. A father wanted to give his son the independence that he had wanted all his life, as he no longer wanted to force his will on him. He promised his son that whatever happens, he will let him do whatever he wanted to do. So, he took his son out to sea when he had become of age, so that he may experience the world. When the son saw the sea, he was mesmerized at the sight, as he had never seen such a large body of water. He asked his father, "What would happen if I were to jump in the water?" The father replied, "Well, there is a creature in the water which would devour you if you were to jump in it. As long as we are on the boat, we will be safe. So, whatever you do, make sure to not go in the water." "Have you seen this creature?" the son asked. "Yes," the father replied. When they both were on the boat, the son kept staring at the water of the sea, as if being drawn to it. When he noticed his father turn his attention away from him, he jumped into the water. When his father saw him in the water, he shouted at him, bidding him to get back onto the boat, but his son refused. "Get out of the water this instant," the father beckoned. "But, father," the son said, "there is no creature." The father tried pulling his son out of the water, but whenever he tried pulling him, the son slapped his father's hand away and moved backwards further away from the boat. The father tried yelling and screaming at his son, and he tried pulling him onto the boat, but the son did not want to listen. The father remembered that he had made a promise to his son, so he reasoned to himself and said, "How can I get my son back into the boat? Should I pull him out forcefully? Or should I leave him and let him be devoured by the creature? If I pull him out forcefully, I would be breaking my promise to him. And if I let him be devoured by the creature, then what kind of father would I be?" But another thought came to him, and he said, "Or I could try and reason with him, so that he freely comes back into the boat on his own." So he calmly sat on the edge of the boat, and he provided every reasoning he could for his son to get back into the boat. He appealed to him emotionally and intellectually, and employed whatever avenue he could to reason with his son. Finally, when his son saw reason, he immediately knew that his father would not tell him to do something unless he knew it was the best for him. So, what does this story have to do with God and the Quran? Well, it is a typical complaint from people that God is unjust by creating hell as a resort of punishment for the crimes of man. This then leads people to claim that God cannot be good and still be this vengeful. Others ask, if God knew that this would be the end result of man, why would he still create man? Or why would he create hell if he truly loved us? These are some of the questions that plague people's minds when they try to reconcile between a good God and the recompense of hell. So, how does this tie into the story that we mentioned before? God can be likened to the Father in the story, and the Son can be likened to human beings. God created the human being and granted him the predisposition to choose which path to follow in life. One path leads man to damnation and the other path would lead him to salvation. But God did not leave the human being without guidance, and without informing him of the consequences of rejecting that guidance, which would eventually lead to man's perpetual destruction. With this choice to choose, there must also be a method of deterrence and a consequence of choosing to do wrong. Thus, due to this presence of choice to do right and wrong, it must also follow that there must also be a consequence to that choice. This is also why we have prisons, because we know that the human being is imperfect, and if given the choice to choose between right and wrong, many human beings will choose wrong, and so we must maintain prisons as a deterrent force and as a consequential result of those bad choices. If God were to create man without the predisposition to act wrongfully, then there would not be any choice to speak of, as this would mean that God is forcefully interfering between man's ability to choose wrong. However, man has to be granted the choice to choose wrong for there to truly be a choice. So, the statement by some people that God could have created man without the ability to do wrong or with the ability to do minimal wrong, and still uphold man's free choice, is certainly not true. When you ask people how this would be possible, they say, "We do not know. If God can do anything, then he should be able to do that." Thus they say, even without noticing the ignorance and the flaw in their questioning. Free choice has to necessitate the choice to do wrong, even the outmost wrong, and wrongdoing has to have some sort of an end result or consequence, similar to how doing good has an end result. People do good to either make themselves feel better, or to make other people feel better, and similarly, they do bad things to make themselves feel good, and to make other people feel bad, though, in most cases, it is driven by their desire to feel good, that they will do whatever is necessary to achieve that goal. So, because it involves infringing on other people's lives and well-being, there must also be a consequential outcome from the wrong that they may do. When God says, "Do not do this wrong thing because it is bad for you," this does not necessarily mean that if you are to do that wrong thing, that He would punish you, rather that all actions bear a reaction or yield a result, and the resulting reaction that may result from that action may not be good for you. As God is one who knows what every action will yield, He can advise you that this action will result in something either detrimental to you or to others. If an action does not infringe on the lives of others, then you bear its personal consequences, and it remains between you and God. But if it infringes on other people's well-being, then it goes to follow that there must be an account of absolution that must be settled between you and that person. Therefore, paradise and hell are a necessity due to the presence of choice between man and action. As to the nature of that hell or that paradise, this remains a matter of contention. As for those who ask, if God knew that this would be an end result of man, why would He still create man? This question can be answered with a simple analogy. You as a mother or as a father, know very well that there is a chance that your child might end up committing horrible crimes and bring about the worst torment to the human race, and also a chance that he or she may end up being a blessing to the human race and bring about the best good that humans have to offer, but also a chance that your child may lie in between these two extremes. The probability that your child may lie in either one of these categories is equally shared, and yet you choose to have faith that your child will overcome that wrong path and adopt the right path. You might even reason and say that you will provide your child with the best upbringing and counsel him with the best advice that you can afford, that you will make sure he only hangs out with the best of people, and ensure that he succeeds in all his endeavors. However, yet even with all these measures, the possibility still remains, and yet your faith overcomes the evidence that you have firsthand, the evidence that you have experienced and witnessed, yet you still choose to have a child. Similarly, God has first-hand knowledge of the torment and reality of hell, yet He chose to overcome the possibility that people would end up there, and so He decided to create the human being, regardless of that knowledge. For most people, even having their child turn out to be evil would not deter them from having a second child. This same analogy can be likened unto God, though to God belongs the highest of examples. Throughout history, God has revealed several revelations to different prophets and communities in order to establish balance and harmony upon the earth. But due to man's predilections of being defiant and obstinate, he acts arrogantly when advised and informed of what could be good for him. The Quran has made it clear that no one can come to guidance unless God has willed it. People take offense to this statement, and they claim that the reason why they do not possess fidelity to God's guidance is because He has willed it to be the case. However, this is a pure case of casting blame, rather than taking responsibility for one's actions. Just because there is a threat of punishment, it does not necessarily mean that you did not have the choice to choose. When we punish people for their crimes in our societies, we do not bear the blame for their actions that led them to that fate. Although in some cases we might be wrong, but the overall concept behind prisons is justified, due to the presence of choice, and man's desire to maintain well-being and harmony. So, how do we reconcile the previous statement with man's predisposition to choose? The Quran is similarly clear on the fact that God does not do any wrong to any human being, so He would not deny guidance to anyone who wants it, and still punish the person. Obviously, God could force every human being to guidance if He wanted to. As He says, "Had your Lord willed, O Muhammad, all those who are in the earth would have attained fidelity altogether." Are you then going to force people until they become people of fidelity? The issue with this is that God wanted the fidelity from man to be genuine, and to be man's own choice without God's direct forceful interference in the matter. So, he granted him the ability to choose. Similar to the father in the story, God could have forced people to guidance just as the father could have pulled his son out of the water by force. But he wanted more than that. He wanted something beyond the superficiality. In the grand scale of things, only God truly has choice. But he granted the human being the choice to choose, in order to see what the human being would do with that choice. And also, so that the human being may not say when he does meet his master, that he did not know, or that it was not his own fault which has led him to his fate. This can be seen in the following verse. Blessed is the one in whose hand is the sovereignty, and he is over all things, competent. The one who created death and life, in order that he may test you, to see which one of you is better in action, though ultimately, he is the one with the authority, the forgiving. Similar to how whenever the father tried to forcefully pull his son out of the water in the story, the more defiant his son became, man also has a predilection to obstinance, which means that, if God were to force him to guidance in addition to granting him the choice to choose, man would eventually become defiant and unwilling to come to guidance. However, just because man has the choice to choose, that does not necessarily mean there are no consequences to him choosing wrong. People conflate this choice with coercion, whereas it is not at all the same. When God tells man, you can choose the right path or the wrong path, what is meant by this is, by being on the right path, you will be doing what is good for you, though you might not know for certain that it is good for you. But you do it because one who knows more than you has told you. You can choose to believe him when he says that, similar to the father in the story. Or you can choose to act defiantly, and choose what would eventually lead you to damnation, though you may not know for certain that it would lead you to that fate. What this ultimately means is that God knows whether something would be good or bad for you, and we can choose to believe him or not. He knows where that choice would lead, so, out of his compassion to the human being, he advises the human being to choose right from wrong. This means that God has used every avenue at his disposal to ensure that the human being is well informed of the eventual consequences that would result from his bad choice, saying, we have indeed expounded for the people in this Quran of every kind of example, but the majority of people do not refuse except out of ungratefulness. As this verse shows, God has employed in the Quran whatever avenue he has at his disposal to appeal to the human being, without violating man's choice to choose between right and wrong. In the Quran, God has appealed to man emotionally, practically, intellectually, psychologically, mentally, spiritually, and yes, even through his innate biological desires. Some people would question, why does God talk about paradise in such a vivid way which appeals to man's baseless desires and lusts? Well, this is merely one avenue which God has utilized to appeal to man in a way that he may understand. People are stimulated through various means. Some people are stimulated through their biological desires, and some are stimulated intellectually, whereas others might be stimulated spiritually, and yet others through different means. If you as a person are not stimulated by verses which discuss paradise or hell, you should not use that as evidence for the Quran not being from God or unappealing, and you certainly should not assume that no one else is stimulated through those means. There are some people who are driven by their desires and debauchery, and it is possible that these people can only be appealed to through desirous means, as it might be the only way that they will be willing to correct their behavior. Personally, I am not stimulated through the pleasures that one would get from rivers of milk or rivers of honey. But just because I am not stimulated through such means, this does not mean that nobody else is stimulated by those means. For some people, it is the emotional descriptions in the Quran that may capture their attention, whereas for others it is through spirituality and the connection that one experiences when they are in touch with the divine. For others, it can even be the mere recitation of the Quran and the sound of the recitation that could awaken their interest and their attention to the message of God. There are yet other people who might be into nature, and who, when they read the verses pertaining to nature, their curiosity is immediately captured, and they may thereby listen to the advice. Others may be into the jurisprudential practical aspect of the Quran, and they too may find that captures their interest. Others may be inclined when they read or listen to the philanthropical verses of the Quran, that there may be something that may encourage them to take up the message. Then there are those whose main focus may lie on family matters, relationships, love, neighborliness, and so many others. For every single person, there is something in the Quran which may capture their attention and eventually lead them to the right course. Not everyone will find every single verse of the Quran relatable, or even applicable to them, and that was never the intent of the Quran. But this is why there are so many people today who may take issue with a certain verse simply because it does not speak to them, or to how they live their life, and they use that verse to condemn all other verses in the Quran, even when that verse was not speaking about them to begin with. But because they simply want to pick at something, they grasp at whatever they can, in order to justify their aversion to the message. An example of this is when someone says, "I don't understand how an omniscient, omnibenevolent, omnipotent God could punish people just because they do not believe in God." They might present verses to you and claim that those verses are speaking about what they are claiming. They might even say, "I went to this scholar or to that scholar, and I was not satisfied with their reply." Well, why did you not reason for yourself first before going to those people? For most people, they might not know that this is what eventually leads them away from guidance, meaning, when they do not apply their faculty of reason which God gave them. They would rather go to another person to do the thinking and reasoning for them, only as a way to remove the responsibility from themselves and place it on somebody else. However, this is not going to be the case in the sight of God, which is why God says, "And every human being, we have fastened his omens to his neck, and we shall bring forth for him on the day of resurrection a record which he will encounter spread out and wide open. Read your record, it will be said to them, your soul is sufficient as an account against you today." Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Have a lovely day, and take very good care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video.